With all these challenging conditions globally and in Egypt, no one was prepared for another shockwave of an extinction-level event like the coming one.
The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank is causing shockwaves across the entire business world.
It's the second biggest bank collapse in U.S. history.
It is the epicenter of tech startups, venture capital.
4 decades after its creation, Silicon Valley Bank was the 16th largest bank in the U.S. It took just a day and a half for it to fall apart.
Silicon Valley Bank was the home of tech startups and held around $200 billion in assets. It collapsed on March 10th, the biggest lender to do so since the global financial crisis.
Now, what can we attribute this to, right? Of course, there's the macroeconomic environment of 2022, whether it's high interest rates, the war in Ukraine, supply chain problems. And we may not be at the bottom of this cycle, we don't know. But what we do know is actually the collapse of SVB it was a shock to an already difficult environment for a lot of these startups.
The SVB collapse left a big hole in the startup world. Startups began to run out of time and money, and unicorns began transforming into zombie firms that are just staying afloat by taking more debt, and their number is on the rise. Over 3,200 venture-backed startups in the US only have failed this year. Their number was in rise since Q2 in 22. These failing startups have raised already a total funding of more than $27 billion, which is now up in smoke, as per data compiled by PitchBook for the New York Times. Experts say that the real number is actually higher than that. Note that the top reason why startups fail is simply running out of cash or failing to raise new funding rounds, which has been a very hard job this year.
By the way, speaking of IPOs, Morning Brew posted a shocking note. This really blew my mind. 3,200 private VC-backed startups have gone out of business this year. Golly, that's hard to imagine, right? They call it a mass extinction event.
In the United States, at least 10% of publicly listed companies are taking on debts that they probably can't repay. Economists call these unviable companies zombie firms.
They crowd out capital that would otherwise be available to healthy firms.
Zombie firms are a growing problem around the world.
The share of zombie firms has been increasing over time. This has detrimental effects to the healthy firms that compete in the same sector.
If a company has to die because the world has changed permanently, let it die.
The Fed's swift interest rate hikes are making long-suspected zombie firms go bankrupt.
The stance of policy is restrictive, meaning that tight policy is putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation.
As these rates rise, it's becoming more expensive to do a lot of things, including operating a business.
There are some firms that actually really should no longer exist.
Bankruptcy.
A stunning fall.
Major restructuring. Debt is piling up. Companies are filing for bankruptcy now at the fastest rate since 2020.
In March 2022, 44 founders of unicorns, private companies valued at over $1 billion, were worth a total of $190 billion, according to Forbes estimates. A year later, Forbes has revalued the world's billionaire-backed unicorns. The results are stark. Half of the wealth of the billionaires behind unicorns has been wiped out.
The tech industry has its own pressures, mainly because most startups are unprofitable and depend on cheap financing.
The appetite for risk has declined a bit. There's less capital available to companies, particularly those that are growing.
Higher rates make these new tech companies less attractive because investors want to see proof of profits immediately. Big companies respond by cutting jobs to reduce costs. Small companies struggle to raise funding.
Well, I think maybe you should think of it in terms of medicine. Sometimes the medicine that you need to correct a condition really may taste awful and may make you feel ill for a short time before you get better. And this is the way it is with higher interest rates. Certainly we need higher interest rates. You can't maintain forever a period of ultra low rates, and central banks around the world are addressing that issue. So over the longer term, it's going to correct the problem of too easy access to capital, too much debt, and so on. In the short term, though, higher rates are going to cause a lot of pain, and particularly for the kinds of companies that we've been talking about, these zombie firms whose earnings are not sufficient even to cover their debt service, let alone investment and operating costs. That's why we call them zombies. They're on borrowed time.
Earlier in 2022, many prominent accelerators and venture capital firms sent alarming insights to startup founders of the gloomy future ahead, like Y Combinator's letter to founders warning them to plan for the worst, and Sequoia's 52-page deck cautioning founders on a crucible moment and a longer recovery ahead. So in this last section, I'd like to leave you with 4 key points that you need to consider for passing this storm, and I've put them in very simple terms. First, adapt to change. The changes within your startup need to match the level of changes that are taking place around you. And I don't mean simple operational changes, I mean changes in the business model itself that would enable you to have a long runway. Remember that it was developed initially for a different environment. So changes whether in value proposition, customer segments, distribution channels, cost structure, revenue streams, or even partners. And here you can think about merger agreements, which are set to become the norm in African startup ecosystem according to African Business. On December 22nd this year, Maxab, which is an e-commerce B2B startup in Egypt that has received over $100 million funding since 2019, is in merger talks with Wasuku, a Kenyan-based e-commerce startup platform that operates in many African countries. Wasuku recently conducted their largest round of layoffs, and Maxab is actively seeking a survival strategy as its cash reserves are depleting. And what's interesting is that both startups share common investors, so talking to your investors may generate opportunities like this. One of the other major changes is that your headquarters should be in the most optimum location for your business survival. Offshore restructuring is a trend that has been gaining traction recently with the growing tightening conditions influenced by the central bank as a way of hedging against risk, and it does offer its attractive benefits. So if this is a critical problem for your business survival, then you may consider thinking about this tactic. The changes can be in many dimensions. However, founders who face reality adapt fast and have discipline not just survive the storm, but can win over it and thrive. Second point, spend your cash wisely. As capital is now expensive, you need to do the cut exercise of all unnecessary expenses. Your target is to remain lean on your business operations to improve your unit economics so that your business can be seen profitable by investors. So you can think of, instead of hiring new full-time staff, you can start working with freelancers on specific time-limited projects. Instead of having huge marketing budgets, you should really seek new creative ways for marketing that capitalizes on the use of AI technology and big data analytics to optimize your strategy. The use of influencer marketing is very effective. Test new sources of revenue and new markets with small-sized experiments to diversify your sources of revenue. Don't deploy full-force budgets unless the small test experiments proved successful in increasing your margins. Third, use your time efficiently. Time is your greatest asset, so focus on productivity and performance for you and your staff. Control the flow of unnecessary information into your head to keep a clear focus on execution. Don't get distracted thinking you will succeed in closing a new large investment round while investors are not really serious about closing any deals. If you are in a seed or early stage, you would still expect some investment flow. But if you are in later stages, the situation will be more difficult with smaller amounts and lower valuation. Fundraising is a time-consuming and distracting task. If you do not have a strong relation with your investors and seeking to knock the doors of new ones, you may be wasting critical time of focus on your business execution in the most efficient way. Last point, unleash your staff potential. In these times, you need to embrace a real innovation culture within your startup. Be open with your team and acknowledge their fears, as this is a storm that you are all in together. This is a moment when leadership really emerge. So get into collective design thinking exercises with your staff and welcome their inputs on any of the 3 dimensions we talked about, whether in business model changes, wise spending of cash, or efficient use of time. You will be amazed at the creative and innovative proposals coming from your staff once they see a real leader among them steering their ship. I hope you manage to change the lives of those close around you to the best. After all, this is what really defines you as an entrepreneur. And let's remain hopeful and confident. Economic cycles have their ups and downs, The current crisis is likely to stimulate innovation and open up unique opportunities for those who can effectively adapt and pivot, eventually giving way to a period of growth and prosperity. In conclusion, I tried to summarize the situation that unfolded within these 3 years, highlighting key milestones and their impacts both globally and nationally. And I hope it was informative as well as entertaining. Please leave a comment below with your story, the challenges you are facing, and how you are managing so far. And tell me if you like this type of content so I can keep producing more of it in the future. Thank you and good luck.